Welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to business confidence. My guest this week is Chris Parke, who, along with his wife Jo, co-founded Talking Talent. Now, I first met Chris, I think about 15 years ago, when Talking Talent was a promising but then very young business, extolling the virtue of organisations retaining and advancing the careers of women in the workplace. What was relatively radical then is, of course, accepted wisdom today and has thankfully spread to a broader concept of diversity, equity and inclusion. Now, the business has continued to grow, and now Chris has just handed over the reins of CEO, which is a big decision, of course, for any entrepreneur. And we'll get into that decision later and what he's up to now. But I was, in the spirit of this podcast, keen to get into the nitty-gritty of his entrepreneurial journey for the benefit of listeners. Now, we often debate whether entrepreneurs are born or made, but in Chris's case, and in keeping with the embryonic business all those years ago, he was quite literally born into a world of female entrepreneurs, as he explained to me the other day.
Both my grandmothers ran their own business. One of them was a publican in London. The other one set up children's nursery in Putney. So, for me, that felt totally normal. And then my mum too was an entrepreneur. She was also a publican, and Dad used to fly planes, so he wasn't around very much, and she was pretty much running that show. So that was really quite cool. Just growing up with these three entrepreneurial women who were quite strident and showed me what good business managers, leaders look like.
At that stage, did you just think, because people are often so influenced by, parents, grandparents, did you just think that everybody ran their lives in that sort of way?
Yeah, we I didn't really kind of give it two thoughts at the time, but looking back, you realize just how unusual that is, particularly for my grandparents. In that generation, there weren't a lot of female entrepreneurs who were starting their own businesses and running them in kind of post-war England. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's really cool, and I owe a lot to them. And they've really the reason why I'm such a kind of ardent feminist now, partly, and obviously I've got three daughters, so that plays a part in that. So definitely that was one thing that has shaped me. I think the second is that when I was a kid, I wasn't brilliant academically. I was kind of middle of the road, but I got a lot of my identity actually through sport. So I used to play a lot of rugby to a reasonable level, and used to play for kind of Wasps and Sale. But I think that taught me a lot about the importance of team, being egoless, and actually kind of builds up a resilience there, because my career was kind of fairly fraught with injury, and getting injuries and coming back from them and having to do that repeatedly really kind of built a resilience, I think, for me. So that's been a key part, and I do owe a lot, I think, to my sport. I always am interested in that crossover between business life and sporting life. And then the third, I think, is, partway through my career, I retrained as a psychologist. I went to INSEAD for a year. And I was passionate already in an amateur way around leadership and leadership psychology, but that really kind of launched the second half of my career and provided the springboard actually for Talking Talent, because I wrote a thesis that I used in the launch of the business.
Did you? I mean, if we think about those influences, if you like, the female entrepreneurs, the sporting sort of lens through which, you were looking at, and the psychologists, things like that. I mean, how did that then lead you to start to develop your career? Did you go and work for somebody else first before you sort of set up your own business? I mean, what sort of journey did you go on sort of once you'd gone beyond sort of adolescence, if you like, into adulthood?
Well, I think, like a lot of my friends, my first job wasn't really the best choice. I went into investment banking.
Right.
I think partly because I was probably trying to please my parents, actually, in a weird way. They were really excited that I'd been given this offer, and I was kind of sat there looking at this piece of paper, thinking, actually, I'm not really that sure about this. But anyway, I went off and did it for 2 years, and and kind of got it under the belt, but it really wasn't what I wanted to do at all. And then I took an MBA at Imperial and came out the back of that working for PwC or Pricewaterhouse as it was on the consulting side. So managing change programs and organization design programs. And actually I really enjoyed that. But again, I was there for 4 years and I found myself kind of migrating more towards supporting leaders around change and the complexity of culture change and behavioral change that sits in behind business change. And I became more and more fascinated as to why some of these men and women were really brilliant at leading that and why others were absolutely lousy. And that was my kind of, I guess, the spark that introduced me to that whole world of leadership psychology.
Now, there's some investment banking and the world of Price Waterhouse and so on. I mean, those are you're talking about firms with very clear structures, and yet you'd grown up in this kind of entrepreneurial household or set of
Yeah,
households. And I mean, was that something that you just think? It's a lot of people who kind of go from one to the other. They just sort of suddenly feel like very small fishes in big pools, and maybe they don't like they kind of feel where's the autonomy, where's the freedom in this?
yeah.
Did you get that kind of feeling, or am I putting words into your mouth there?
No, I mean, I didn't really kind of recognize that at Barclays because I was just so kind of fish in the wrong pond
Mm.
and desperate, even after I think 4 or 5 months, I was kind of desperate to find a way out, but knew I needed to kind of put in a couple of years before doing that for the sake of the CV. So but when I was in PwC, what was really interesting is I did find the system incredibly frustrating. And there were examples where I would take observations of what I thought were kind of systemic challenges that various clients were facing to the partners, with a view that we really should be taking something around this to the marketplace, because it was all around the kind of dot-com boom that I was there. And I just found the partnership so slow to be able to evolve and change and respond to that,
Mm.
which was very frustrating. And actually, I probably looking back, I left there to join a smaller consultancy. But in both of those consultancies, I probably wasn't a great employee. I was probably a bit of a pain in the arse.
In what way? What do you mean?
Well, just kind of quite agitative and wanting change, but probably not doing my best job in articulating what that should be. And yeah, I mean, I was kind of an entrepreneur, fighting to get out. I think looking
Yeah.
back.
So do you think your bosses at the time were saying this Park guy, he's trouble, because he just seems very restless and maybe were you thinking, were you looking for the exit door at that point to stay there?
Not really, because I was still, I think, Trevor, trying to work myself out. I was
Yeah.
still trying
Okay.
to understand who Chris Park was in my twenties, and also I didn't really know at that point, what I wanted to start a business in. I was still trying to work that out. But yeah, I mean, I think they would find me a really cordial, nice guy, but at times, quite dogged in my point of view, and maybe a bit kind of frustrating in my tenacity to try and get something done.
Okay. Right. So how did you go from the Chris Parker Price Waterhouse to the founder or co-founder of Talking Talent? Just let's go on that little bit of the journey about how you found out who the real sort of Chris Park was. I mean, let's explore that gap.
Yeah, well, so the transition out of Price Waterhouse Coopers PwC was into a smaller consulting practice called Cedar, and they used to do things like executive coaching, outplacement, and I was hired to lead up their change function, which they didn't have. And part of the trade-off there was that they would train me up as a coach. So I was lucky enough to meet Joe there, my wife and co-founder, and Joe and I, used to sit down and have coffees and say, look, we could probably be doing this for ourselves and be doing it really successfully, because we were at that stage in our career in our early 30s where we were kind of managing some of the client relationships. The relationship was strongly with us as much as it was with Cedar. And also we could see kind of different things that could be done, in our view, better and more innovatively. So anyway, that kind of led to us searching for a kind of purpose around what Talking Talent would be. And we were both really passionate about this whole space of women that we were coaching at the time not having a very progressive, positive experience oftentimes of the organizations they were working with when they got to management levels. And we felt that actually some of the women we were coaching were so much more talented than some of the men, but they seemed to just not be able to navigate some of the complexities of what we now know are kind of very biased systems in the corporate world. And we wanted to do something with that, use business psychology and executive coaching to kind of try and shift the tables a little bit.
Was there a particular moment then? I mean, you went from having sort of coffee with Joe to and talking about these things to a moment where was there a moment where you went, right, we better do something about it then, or did it kind of almost, or was it just talk for a while? And then was there a particular event that kind of made you think, well, I've got to do something about it now?
Well, the event was that Joe got pregnant. And
Right.
I know the weird, looking back is kind of crazy, Trevor, but we kind of thought, well, there's never going to be a great time to do this. And many people thought we were absolutely bonkers starting a business at the same time as about to become parents for the first time. But we thought, well, if we're going to do this, we've got to give it a go. So we ended up launching the business when Joe, I think, was 7 months pregnant. Is when we first incorporated it. We've been working on it for months before that. And and it was, looking back, Trevor, we sold our flats in London. We moved into rented so that we had a bit more, I guess, financial flexibility. So we didn't have to, earn our full salaries that year. So we really did take the plunge properly with the view that we can always go back to corporate life if it doesn't work out.
In your minds, did you have a sort of, a lot of people when they start, they say any form of self-employment or their own business say, I'll like give it a year or something. I mean, did you have that in your mind, or did you just not think in those terms? So you think this is it, this is our purpose, we're just going for it?
Well, I kind of left Cedar before Joe, so I was already winning, enough coaching and consulting contracts for us to feel that, it was going to be viable. And then Joe joined me in that kind of self-employed status. So we were already kind of generating enough income. And I think that kind of gave us confidence then at that stage to say, well, okay, well, let's look at something slightly bigger here that has a broader purpose than just being kind of jobbing coaches and consultants. Let's try and build something greater.
So a bit of context then for the listener. Just tell us a bit more about Talking Talent. As you set it up and where and how. Just a quick picture of sort of how it has grown and where you are at the moment, and then we'll go into the detail a bit more.
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking the question. So Talking Talent, Joe and I set it up in 2005, but we started out with a very clear purpose that we were there to try and help our clients, large corporates mostly, build a far greater balance of diverse talent right at the top of organizations. So for us, that meant really looking at kind of management level upwards. Why is it that so many women were quitting corporate life and or unable to realize their full potential, which then led to this kind of disparity in number of women at senior levels? That's what we were trying to fix. So since that time, Trevor, we've kind of expanded really the purpose to look more broadly at building equitable, diverse and inclusive organizations more broadly. So we do actually a lot of work now around race and ethnicity as well, and supporting senior leadership teams in their kind of capacity of trying to build more inclusive cultures and organizations where diverse talent can really thrive.
Okay, and so there's been that change along with the evolution of people's awareness and understanding of sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, were you at the early days when you were working with businesses? I'm assuming that there obviously there's a lower level of understanding because it's earlier
Yeah.
and people are building their awareness. Was your job really early on to just show some people that actually they did have a challenge or a problem? Because there's also an awareness to action gap, before people actually go and do something about it. I mean, were you having to educate your market as you were going along?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Your hunch is right. 2 decades ago, this was really hard. And actually, one of the successes for us was that we focused Talking Talent initially on one particular career transition point that we knew was a huge point of pain for our clients, which is when women start a family
Mm,
and the inability of organizations to support women's careers at that point through that transition. So that's what I actually wrote my thesis on at INSEAD.
mm, mm,
And we involved some of the investment banks and professional services firms in that study. And we were kind of really holding a mirror up and presenting back to them a problem that they already knew that they had with a potential coaching solution to get to the other side of that. And that was hugely successful, is recognizing one point of that, I guess, talent journey where we knew that they were leaking really talented individuals in abundance, and being able to then offer them a solution to that was successful.
What though was I mean, you mentioned at the start of that answer that you're saying it was quite hard,
Yeah,
sort of earlier on. I
was
mean, I mean, what was stopping people? I mean, a lot of people were sort of saying, sympathetic things like, well, we know you're right, Chris,
yeah.
and we know we've got to do something about it. But, and then what's the but? Was it that there was no budget or they couldn't sell it upstairs? Or what were the problems?
Yeah, well, I think there were so many, but the key one was really that it just was not a board level dialogue. It just wasn't. So it was kind of owned by HR. Very few organisations had anything like a kind of diversity or inclusion function at that point. And actually, I don't think that really mattered. But the most important thing in reality was that the senior leadership weren't aware of or cared about this whole topic. It just
Mm,
wasn't something that really was part of their agenda. And so you were never going to get traction, and you were never really going to get budget,
mm,
importantly, to try and adjust it
mm.
until that changed.
Okay. So was there a particular moment or a particular year in which you suddenly thought, well, yeah, we are getting traction now, or people are understanding this? Because I mean, I can get totally the it's a struggle to start with, but was there a turning point either internally in your business and the way you talked about it, or in the market more generally?
Well, I think one of the things that we did early, and we're probably kind of ahead of our time there, we really used data to build a business case. Because I think still to this day, lots of people talk about the importance of, having diversity at senior levels, but they don't really present a kind of a case as to why that is. Why is that going to have an impact on your organization, on your business strategy, on your bottom line? We were very mindful of using data to make sure that we collected the differences between retention rates, progression rates, and we're able to put a kind of pound and a dollar sign next to that. And then very quickly that attracted the attention of CFOs, COOs, and you were able to then have a far more elevated senior conversation to say, look, this is saving you millions of pounds. This is a really important thing for you to consider an action.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean that's a very important thing about the use of data. Now let's if we fast forward through that sort of dynamic of people, realizing they think these guys are serious. They've got the numbers at their fingertips and they're able to talk the language of business. Your business has obviously developed to a great extent. I mean, and these days, people's concepts generally, it is taken seriously at top level, in many organizations, and the lens has widened, as you rightly as you rightly said. How do you now, as a business, that's a blessing and a curse. And it's blessing in that there's a lot more people who are ready and understand, the sorts of things that you're trying to do. A curse a little bit in the fact that there's probably quite a lot of competitors who have sort of now muscled in on that as well. I mean, how do you? Is there a way that you have been distinguishing yourself more recently? So you've gone from the awareness phase to the sort of how do you continue to differentiate yourself?
Yeah, such a great question. I mean, I didn't answer the second part of your
Okay.
question before, which is kind of linked actually, which is why I'm referencing back to it. But I think, there's been a series of things that have ensured that it is a board level agenda item now, where you've had the kind of Me Too movement. You've had, of course, the whole Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and there will be other waves that will crash on the shore. I'm sure of it. We'll be talking about something different in 18 months' time. Because it's become a societal issue, it's something that now has to be discussed at board level. But that's different from boards taking it seriously, not just checking the box,
Mm.
which we'll come back to. So I think, how do you get boards not just kind of engaged with it because there's internal pressure from staff, there's external pressure from society, from clients, customers, consumers. How do you get them to kind of really engage with it at a different, deeper level? You've got again, I think, try and link it to their purpose, their strategy, their strategic objectives, and you've also got to use really good data science to show that whatever it is that you're doing is having an impact. And you've got to, in my mind, use really effective business psychology. So use kind of tried and tested practices that are actually going to make a difference, rather than, just have a nice conversation about something and, talk a load of mother and apple pie and nothing actually changes. So I think that's how we try and differentiate ourselves from the masses out there, is kind of using data, showing that it is effective, and also using, really rigorous psychological approaches that we know work.
Mm. So moving on from the way the business has changed, I'd like to sort of delve a little bit, into the way in which you've run the business, because our listeners are, of course, are sort of fledgling entrepreneurs, or maybe they've been doing their business for a short while, and maybe they're thinking about the next phase,
Yeah.
of how they do that. So I'd like to sort of explore, if take you back, if you like, to the time when you set up the business. And I mean, was it you and Joe and a kitchen table, and you're just like there, just kind of working away? And how did that go? And what did you find about the disciplines of running your own business that was sort of expected or unexpected? Were there things you found particularly difficult? And also, it's a complicated question. What at what stage did you start to think beyond the kitchen table, or whatever table you were working on?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'd say it was definitely a kitchen table. For us, it was actually a garden shed.
Okay.
We had this outbuilding that used to get freezing cold and boiling hot in equal measure. It's never the right temperature. But I think so. My first message to any budding entrepreneur out there is just to kind of to go for it. If you think you've got a business idea, just have the courage and confidence to go for it. And I'm sure we'll be talking later on about how to make sure you're more likely to succeed or otherwise. But it's a scary thing, starting your own business, and terrifically exciting at the same time. But that for lots of us, there's always, as many voices in our heads saying you're not going to succeed in this as there are. You're gonna smash it. So you've just got to sometimes have the courage to step into the abyss.
Mm.
I think for Joe and I, we really recognised the amount of people that were engaging in that study that I wrote, and then we were lucky that the kind of rapidity with which we were starting to convert clients who recognised that, yes, indeed, this is a problem that they had and they needed to solve for it. We won clients like UBS, Citi, Linklaters, McKinsey. We're all clients that came on board quite early doors for us. And of course, when you start winning logos like that, it builds a momentum of its own.
In that case, then, I mean, the moments you just talked about at the start of that answer, you talked about
Yeah.
sort of, moments of doubt,
Yeah.
where things come along. Are you able to sort of say a few things like that? Well, so if you were winning those early clients, many people would go, "That's fantastic. That's a great start." Were your moments of doubt then, or yours and Joe's, to do with the dynamics of how you then handled that? In terms of you've got people, you've got good clients, you've got interest, but then you enter this kind of this world where you're almost trying to build the spaceship, at the same time as you're trying to take off.
So there were various transition points for us. So one was that transition where you recognize that it's going to be bigger than the two of you, and then you're into kind of starting a bit to run a business, and of course, you're right, Trevor. You need to start thinking about, okay, operationally, how are we going to scale this, and who actually is going to do various aspects of the work so that actually we can give a great client experience. So you're starting then to recruit individuals. And then the second inflection point for us was we're winning enough work for multiple associates. We were using coaches and external experts to help us deliver and appear that we had scale. And a second inflection point for us was, look, we're winning enough work here that we can employ some of these coaches and consultants. Is that what we want to do? Do we want to become employers on a grander scale here, or do we just want to be managing a bunch of freelance consultant and coaches? And so we felt strongly that we could again differentiate ourselves by having an employed group of coaches, which is very unusual in the marketplace. But we felt we could be more innovative, have a stronger culture, and build a greater client experience through that if we had them in-house.
Okay, but that's quite a big decision, isn't it? I mean, financially,
Huge. Yeah.
so I mean, there must have been kind of long debates. Were there nights, dark nights of the soul, where you're thinking, am I doing the right thing? Sort of doing
Yeah.
this? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, and I think running business is about making more good decisions than bad. That's all it is. And you make some absolute howlers along the way. I mean, Joe and I have made some really big mistakes, but it is about making more good decisions than bad. But at various points, even in the first seven, because we're trying to build out this structure and this model that can facilitate growth and take us to kind of new and exciting levels.
What did you do if couples don't always agree on everything?
Yeah,
And I mean, where if you had a business, disagreement about the direction of travel, I mean, how
yeah.
would you have resolved that? A lot of people do work with their partners, but what do you do in those kind of tricky situations?
Well, I think working with your partner is sometimes a kind of blessing and a curse. But for Joe and I, definitely, we've enjoyed it more than we've sat around a kitchen table bemoaning it. I think some of that, Trevor, is because there's absolute trust there and loyalty. But the other thing that I love about working with Joe is that she will just call out when I'm being a real idiot and I'm about to make a bad decision, and she's not afraid to tell me where I've got things wrong or where I'm about to do something a bit daft. And so I think whoever it is that you're going into business with, you need to kind of generate that level of honesty and trust and loyalty with each other as fast as you possibly can, and definitely make sure that you're able to have all those difficult conversations in a kind of reasonable and constructive way, because it's so important.
Another common thing amongst sort of in the course of entrepreneurial growth is that sometimes founders become the bottle stopper in their own
Yeah.
growth because they just love doing the doing. And I mean, was that ever a problem for you and Joe, in that you just love doing the client work, you love delivering, and so that sometimes got in the way of what you should have been doing, the old kind of thing about working on the business, not in the business,
Oh yeah, yeah,
mentality.
definitely. I mean, if you spoke to some of our previous employees, I think that there were definitely times where they would have been frustrated that they're working with a husband and wife team, because inevitably there is that creates a kind of an interesting power dynamic that you've really got to be mindful of, I think, when you are dealing with colleagues, and make sure that you are trying to build inclusive decision making as much as you possibly can, so that it's not always just reverting to the founders. That's hard to do, because as owner managers, of course, you are going to have the final say, but you want to make sure that it's a reasoned conversation that gets you to that point.
And you mentioned about making more good decisions than bad decisions. I
Yeah,
mean, and of course, I'm going to push you on this a little bit. Is
yeah.
that what do you think is the best thing that you did in terms of developing the business? And what was the probably the harsh lesson that you've had to learn along the way? Have you got an example of each?
So I think what's really helped Talking Talent more than anything else is having a really clear purpose. So we've been able to attract people away from places like PwC and the big accounting firms, the big consulting firms rather, because they are prepared to work for a smaller organization, but with a really clear and a really exciting purpose. And that's then, I think, in turn, helped us build a really effective culture that
Mm.
is focused on being more human, being more people centric, and it's made a really big difference. That's been, I think, the most important thing for us: purpose and culture,
Okay.
for sure. And I think the things that conversely we've got, I think surrounding yourself with really great people is so key. I think talent and having good people is really, really important. And I would say some of the worst decisions we've made is when we've not trusted our gut instinct on individuals,
Mm.
because we're so desperate to get someone in to be able to help with the growth of the business. And we've had a gap for a while that we've compromised in certain
Yeah.
ways, and
Yeah.
it's always been a terrible mistake.
Yeah, and of course, and if your business is talent, and about getting in the right talents as well, you have to be kind of walking the walk, if you like, about sort of
Yeah,
getting talent. I mean, that everybody makes mistakes in hiring and so on, and goes through and learns sort of through that process. So it's one of those things. But I guess we all have those little moments where we kind of feel that we should have trusted our gut in certain
yeah.
certain hires. I mean. What advice would you give to those who are starting or thinking about starting their own business? You said earlier on, go for it, which is which
Yeah.
is a good place to start, but go for it can mean lots of different things. I mean, once they've made that decision to go for it, I mean, what sort of lessons, what sort of things would you pass on, to those who are just thinking about it, mulling it over, or maybe they've reached that moment in their life where they're going to have to make a decision about something in the way that you did.
Yeah, I think that there's something. Yeah, there are a few things that come to me. Well, one of them is spend longer than you think in the planning phase. And what I mean by that is, have a real clarity around, what is your purpose? What are you trying to achieve? And why should clients or consumers come to you versus anyone else? What is it that differentiates you? I think the second thing is surround yourself with really good people. So within your networks, there will always be people that that have started their own business, are successful business people, working in similar fields to the ones that you're about to launch a business in. Just go and talk to them, and where you can, share your idea around what it is that you're about to start doing. Honestly, it's such an important thing. The more conversations you can have, the more clarity you'll get, and the more ideas you'll get around how to launch this thing successfully. But then, once you've launched, also just surround yourself. Joe and I were lucky. We kind of had people that we could go and speak to around various things, because we weren't experts in accountancy or tax or marketing. We had the brilliant lady called Carrie Bedingfield, who who helped us with our brand and launching the website. We're always indebted to Carrie for her work there. But that's just one example where we would have never been as successful if we'd not used Carrie's expertise and advice to help us.
Okay, and that's great. I remember Carrie
Do you?
from before. Yes, I do, and I
Yeah.
can certainly echo what you were saying about here. What's next for you now? I can't help but notice on the website that there is a new CEO at the business and so on, which means
Yeah.
that you are taking a different role now. I mean, what tell us about that evolution and what the future you hope sort of holds for yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, you said it earlier. I think one of the hardest things, but it's really important for CEOs, is recognizing where they become the bottle stop. And actually, I think there are different phases of an organization's growth where different CEOs will be better placed. So it's really exciting time for me. Marie-Claire Ray's taking over from me, because there's a recognition that she's got, some talents and skills that I wouldn't have had to help scale it to the next level. As it's trying to go from a 10 million to 30 million turnover organization is a very different transition from the one that I've taken it from, that kind of 1 to 10. But so for me, it's a really exciting time because it means that I can step away from the day to day. I can still support in a non-exec director capacity, but hopefully do other things. And I'm really fascinated in that kind of crossover between corporate life and sporting life. So that's one thing that I'm interested in, and particularly I think there's this whole notion of elite athletes normally have multiple different coaches, whereas in the business world, oftentimes a senior leader will be given one executive coach. And I just think that's kind of total madness in a
Mm.
way. How can one individual possibly give you all the support that you need with the complexities of leading a business in this kind of slightly crazy world that we're in right now?
Okay, and so you're entering a new world of where you're able to sort of almost kind of do the full loop back to your sporting passion when you were younger, and I'm sure has been enduring, and just the variety of the things that you can now do. I mean, it's going to be different though, isn't it? A different kind of discipline, because for so many years you've been sort of very focused, on a particular passion with a particular, very, as you said, clear purpose and culture. How do you think you'll adjust to the sort of world where there's lots of different kind of types of balls and projects and things going on? Will it be any different, or will it feel, just, it's the same and full, but maybe, more of the unexpected kind of stuff happening?
I mean, I think it's going to be totally different. Having a portfolio career will be very different from being a CEO of 90 people across the world. So but I'm kind of looking forward to walking through that door and embracing that. And would really love to help other entrepreneurs, other people who are trying to build their own scale ups. You, you said it earlier, but I would want them to avoid some of the really daft mistakes that I've made. And if I can support anyone to help them make better decisions and avoid some of what I've had to wade through, then yes, there's got to be some positives out of that.
When I first met Chris all those years ago, I really felt I was working with somebody whose business was onto something really good. Not just for them, of course, but for the good of everyone else as well. And so it's proved. Note how Chris and Joe had early wins to boost confidence in their business idea. That was never really a problem for them. But the growing pains were, well, just that, growing pains. I mean, his refreshing honesty around the need to surround yourself with good people, the way he evangelized around using data to build a business case, and the importance of purpose and planning. And I'll add a third of my own that's obvious to me from the interview with Chris, of passion. Also, I love the way he talked about the acceptance that when it comes to decisions, you're going to make some howlers, but at least aim to make more good ones than bad ones. And it's very obvious that Talking Talent did just that. So thank you, Chris, for sharing your wisdom. And thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast or our business, Merrible Media, you can find us on LinkedIn. Don't forget to join us for our next episode. But until then, thanks for listening.